Hello, fellow risk takers, and welcome to my worst investment ever. Stories of loss to keep you winning. In our community, we know that to win in investing, you must take risk, but to win big, you've got to reduce it. To join our community, go to myworstinvestmentever.com and receive the following 5 free benefits. First, you get the risk reduction checklist I've created from the lessons I've learned from all my guests. Second, you get my weekly email to help you increase your investment return. Third, you get a 25% discount on all A Stotts Academy courses. And fourth, you get access to our Facebook community to get to know guests and fellow listeners. And finally, you get my curated list of the top 10 podcast episodes. Fellow risk takers, this is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stotts from A Stotts Academy. And I'm here with featured guest, Randy Mortensen. Randy, are you ready to rock?
I am beyond ready and excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. Randy guides talented individuals whose drive has led them towards destructive behavior. Well, do you know anybody, to the listeners out there, whose drive to be successful has led them to destructive behaviors? Listen up. He facilitates an 8-week cohort guiding members towards true significance, success, and sustainable living, because he believes and he's proven that you can have both. Randy, take a minute and fill any further tidbits about your life.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. It's just a huge blessing to be able to share a little bit of my gray-haired wisdom to all of your listeners around the globe. And when people say, well, tell me who you are, I actually come from a background of finance and energy. Started out in the banking industry, went into financial services, bought and sold a couple of businesses, and then was fortunate to get sober about just over 30 years ago. And following that time of sobriety, then I was actually part of a company that was acquired by a multi-billion-dollar, a $60 billion gas and electric utility in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I became vice president of that utility. And it was there that I was really motivated to the point where I realized that anybody with an addiction or anybody with a compulsive destructive behavior, whether it's alcohol or porn or drugs, there's such a stigma in our workplaces. And there's a stigma in the business community, in our faith communities, as well as in our families. And so for the last 15 years, I've really been on a mission to crush the stigma in those arenas. And the people that are dying today are husbands, wives, and sons and daughters of people who love them. And 1 out of every 4 people in this world is being impacted by either their or a loved one's poor choices. 1 out of every 4 people in this world. That's my mission for wanting to be a guide for those talented management professionals whose drive has led them down a path of destructive and compulsive behaviors.
That's powerful. And I know, I've faced my challenges of addiction, and I faced them at a young age. And I also learned that you have to put in the work. There's 2 parts of the work to get through the struggle. And it's interesting when you think about, everybody's struggling with COVID and all that stuff, but there's a lot of people that have, destructive behaviors, and COVID has only made it worse. And they may be very successful in some areas, as you have been throughout your life, but there's this one part of their life that's falling apart, and it's reflected in their family, it's reflected in their relationships, and it's reflected in how they feel. That feeling of waking up in the morning, feeling like there's no point here. I'm going through the same thing. I mean, I can remember that. I still clearly remember that life just became kind of meaningless in a way. And then when I got sober and I realized, first of all, there's a huge amount of work up front. You got to step back. You got to stop doing what you're doing. You got to work with people, work through a 12-step program and really try to do an inventory of your past and all that. There's a lot of work there. And if you do that work, if you are painstaking about that phase of your recovery, you're going to be amazed because you're going to be able to get through that. But then there's ongoing work. And so, when I think about the people that are suffering out there, and I think about the service that you're offering, maybe help tell the audience, if you know someone out there, or if you as a listener are struggling, how they can find you. I'll have links in the show notes, and what they would expect to if they got involved with what you're doing.
Well, I think that one something that I say very often is, what blows my mind is it doesn't matter what sort of achievements a person has had in their profession, or how much education they might have, or the degrees, or what their salary is, or what their balance sheet looks like, their wealth portfolio. It doesn't matter what they've accomplished. When they come up to me and they ask a question like this, they'll say, Randy, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, right?
Mm.
Or I don't know, I need to change because I'm about ready to lose it all. And I say, well, it's very interesting, because it sounds to me like you really do care and you do really want to change. Why haven't you? And what blows my mind is the response is the same 4 words every time, no matter what they've accomplished. I don't know how. Every time, I don't know how. This person could have a PhD in whatever, or they could, have hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank account. It's the same response. I don't know how. So what I've really taken on the task of, and you can go to my website, it's at randymortensen.com. It's www.randy, last name Mortensen, Mortensen.com. And on the front page, there's a 21 question assessment. And what that assessment will tell you is whether you're a mild, moderate, or severe case of substance use disorder. If you're mild or moderate, my lifestyle champion cohort is a good fit for that person.
Right.
And if you're severe, then you and I both know networks that we can refer people to.
Yep.
And to get the help that they sorely need. Because what did I decide? What was the final? I had to admit initially that my life was unmanageable. Right? Step 1, very basic. Is your life unmanageable? The answer is yes, if you're struggling with that compulsive and destructive behavior. So once someone does that assessment, and there's no cost for it, it's something that is very confidential. And so the first thing that's critical for that person seeking help is, how do you evaluate where you are today? What's the scenario that you're in post that evaluation? So it's evaluation is number 1. Number 2 is, you need to learn the tools. You need to be equipped to live a different life with different choices. And you talked about the inventory. How do we admit all the wrongs? But at the same time, I'm also quick to point out in steps 4 and 5 that it's not only important for you to admit what you've done wrong, but give your credit for some things you have done well. Right. Because there is a champion that's within you. You've just buried that lifestyle champion within you by your poor choices. So phase 1 of that cohort is evaluate. Phase 2 is equip. But then it's very important that once you have this new lifestyle, guess what? Your old friends aren't going to be your friends because, those choices that you made, you don't want to make anymore. So now we also look at, how do you learn to enjoy the new you? And so those are the 3 phases. And it's just critical for people to fight through the fear, because as you said, in this time of pandemic, suicide rates have skyrocketed. Relapse rates are at exceedingly high rates. They've increased so much even since 1990. In the last 18 months, they've even increased at more than double digits. Wow. So the death toll is heavy. And the wreckage is beyond imagination, for sure.
Great. I'll have the links in the show notes for the listeners out there. So if you want to reach out, just go to the show notes, click the links, and get in touch with Randy and take that test on his website. Well, Randy, now it's time to share your worst investment ever. And since no one goes into their worst investment thinking it will be. Tell us a bit about the circumstances leading up to it, and then tell us your story.
Right. And I made hundreds of horrible decisions during my drinking years. Even though I was successful on the surface, you would have never known, all the poor choices that I was making that cost me marriages. And when I say marriages, I'm now on my third marriage and sober 30 years. Not a surprise that I've been married 31 years. It was because of the beautiful woman I've been married to as my third wife that really led me to get sober, because I didn't want to go through the turmoil again. So the poor decisions cost me marriages, two beautiful women's lives that I screwed up. And so even despite those poor choices, I was a successful business guy in financial services, bought and sold a couple of service businesses. At one time, we had 1,300 restaurants under contract in 7 states. Wow. Even, and sold that out. And then I was fortunate to become an early stage, not partner, but I was an early stage founder in a lighting retrofit company. And that first year we did 600,000 in revenue. Year 2, we did 10 million. Year 2, we did 20 million. Year 3, we did 40 million. And this is in the mid 90s. Okay. So it's in the Enron era when, all deregulation was happening and so on. And we ran out of money. So ultimately, the utility in Minneapolis acquired it. I became a vice president of that unregulated subsidiary of now a $60 billion gas and electric utility. But I walked away from that. And people thought I'd started drinking again. Why would anybody walk away from that lucrative career? But I knew there had to be something more in life from a significance standpoint. And so I wanted to help people, and I had no hint what that meant. And so I pursued doing work. I actually served on the president's task force for the redevelopment of Puerto Rico. So I'd go to the White House office building every 6 months for a couple of years. And so I wanted to do work in the Caribbean and Africa. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to support those efforts, I should look at a significant investment. And I was convinced that the hemp industry was going to be that significant opportunity for an investment. Well, $500,600,000 later, it's probably still a good investment, but the returns have been horrible for the last 4 or 5 years. And so I look at it from the standpoint of I wasn't well enough connected to that network of growers and the network of financiers in Canada. And I didn't have the connections in Europe that I should have had, because a lot of the hemp industry was in the Netherlands and in that part of Europe. And here in the United States, there was stigma. Right? There was stigma against that because it was compared to the cannabis industry. It's not the cannabis industry. Hemp. I know it's a plant. So the being far too aggressive in that investment, I should have shown some temperament control and not put as much money into it as I did. Those are the regrets for sure.
And can you think of the day or the period of time where you kind of realize this really isn't going the way I planned?
Yeah, it was when my wife came to me and she said, how much more are you really thinking you're going to put into this thing? And because I was already a couple $100,000 over what I had told her we would do. So I have a beautiful wife and she's very conservative. And I was overextended, and that's when I knew that we already had it set to do a reverse merger with a company in Vancouver.
Right.
Okay. We already had that dialed in. We just couldn't get the revenue to the point where we needed it, basically.
So tell me, what lessons did you learn from this experience?
Be a bit slower to jump into the deep end of the pool. I thought I knew how to build a company because I had run a $130 million business unit with 400 people on my team that I was responsible for, but I had far more backing, I had far more access to capital. It was the utility, right? So that's what I would say. I thought I had sufficient access to capital. I thought I had sufficient access to the markets. I didn't.
Yeah. And maybe I'll share what I take away. I think, this is a lesson, I think, for particularly for executives out there, men and women who have achieved success in their life, in their career, they're making a good salary, things are going well. I want this lesson to be a warning to you, to everybody listening, that what your success in the corporate environment does not necessarily translate into the startup environment. And it's nice to think that it does, but oftentimes the skills required are different. And the breadth of skills is much different, where you've got to be in marketing, you've got to be accounting, you've got to do all these things in a startup world. And so I think the biggest lesson is for people that are in executive positions, don't rush to go out and, leave it all and go start up something in your by taking the confidence that you feel today in your success in your job and saying that is going to translate into success in my startup. That would be kind of my biggest takeaway. Anything you would add to that?
I would, yeah, that well said on your part. I think the other aspect is that, and I teach this when I'm doing workshops or speaking from stages, is it's so important to communicate with your spouse and to draw on his or her common sense. And even, I would like to think that when I was drinking, I was making solid business decisions. I wasn't. I was just lucky, and I was a hard worker. And so what happened to me, I'm convinced, as I reflect back, is I really became overconfident in my abilities. And I thought, well, I've done this before, I can do it again. But it was in an arena that I had no experience in. And frankly, I didn't engage in dialogue with my spouse to get her take from a common sense standpoint. And I think the other aspect is there were a couple of people that were engaged in the network I was in that were drinking too much, partying too much. That was that old lifestyle I wanted nothing to do with. And so I was drawn in because I thought, here, these are smart guys, but yet their destructive, their poor choices not only affected them in the long run, but they affected me also. So that's the coaching from that aspect of it.
I went through all of my episodes to try to classify them and, build the lessons that we can learn from this. And one of the lessons, I was just opening up the document, but one of the lessons is this, and it comes from another episode, but this will be, the same type of general lesson from this one. And I wrote this out like this: confidence from past success will blind you from doing the research you should perform when starting a new company.
Brilliant.
And I wrote down
pride and ego. And
exactly.
They're all contributing. Yeah.
And my solution to this problem or this risk that you're going to face for the listeners out there is develop a hypothesis of your customer's desire, test some minimum viable product, review the outcome with someone that you trust, and iterate. So brilliant. That's the outcome from that. All right. So now, based upon what you learned from this story and what you continue to learn, what one action would you recommend our listeners take to avoid suffering the same fate?
Well, similar to what you just said is really draw on input from others and apply a heavy element of common sense instead of trusting your own intuition and instinct. And I, it was an emerging market, and an emerging market, what's the rate of failure? 7 out of 8 fail in emerging markets, right? Or in startups. I just didn't think there was any way possible I could be in that 12%.
And that, my friends, is overconfidence.
Yes.
That's how we feel. There's no way I'm going to lose. I'm smart. I know what I'm doing.
Right.
I've seen this. I've been in tough environments. I know what it's like. That's the overconfidence that we all feel.
Right on.
So last question, what is your number one goal for the next 12 months?
Well, prior to the pandemic, my coaching and speaking business was growing at a pretty decent rate. And so I shared with you, I was supposed to speak in Africa to an economic development group. And so my number one goal is to return to the stages, whether they be digital stages or in conferences and so on, because I'm looking to speak to, I refer to white collar corporate America, right? Or that's why a better representation is talented management official or professionals, talented management professionals. So my goal has been in the $20,000 to $25,000 a month range from coaching as well as speaking and doing workshops. So that's my number one goal. Actually, before that, I will say I'm almost 3 years behind my deadline. I'm finishing my book. My forthcoming book is titled God Took Me to Las Vegas to Get Sober. So that's probably my number one, because the completion of that book will then stir up interest in some of these other programs, in addition to my own podcast also.
Right. Fantastic. Well, listeners, there you have it. Another story of loss to keep you winning. My number one goal for the next 12 months is to help you, my listener, reduce risk and increase return in your life. To achieve this, I've created our community at myworstinvestmentever.com, and I look forward to seeing you there. As we conclude, Randy, I want to thank you again for coming on the show. And on behalf of A. Stotts Academy, I hereby award you alumni status for turning your worst investment ever into your best teaching moment. Do you have any parting words for the audience?
I just want to encourage that guy or gal that's listening, that's struggling with drugs or alcohol or porn or whatever that compulsive and destructive behavior is. I just want to encourage them not to wait another day to reach out to you or to me, because there is hope. And within each and every one of us is that lifestyle champion that's waiting to be revealed, but we have to make the decision to seek help. And there are people out there that want to help. My lifestyle champion cohort is a great option, but there's other people out there that love and care about you enough to make that life change today. Yep.
That's great. A great point. And if anybody listening is struggling, either yourself or with someone that's struggling with addiction, just come to the show notes, come to the website. You can contact Randy. You can also contact me on the website, myworstinvestmentever.com. Just go to the contact section and send me a message. It will come to my personal email. But there are solutions to this problem, and we both are examples of that. And that's a wrap on another great story to help us create, grow, and protect our wealth. Fellow risk takers, this is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stott, saying, I'll see you on the upside.